The laughter hit her like a physical blow, sharp, cruel, and echoing with 5 years of history. Standing in the most opulent ballroom she had ever seen, Camila felt herself shrink under the weight of that sound. It was her ex-husband Carlos, his arm draped around a stunning woman in diamonds, laughing as he introduced Camila as a quaint relic from his past. In that moment, she was nothing more than a punchline, a before picture to his glorious after. He thought he had won. He thought he had buried her under the rubble of their divorce. What he didn't know was that the man who owned every brick, every crystal, and every inch of the ground they were standing on was walking right up behind her, and he was about to change the entire story. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a utility bill and a catalogue for artisanal tile. It was embossed on cardstock, so thick and creamy, it felt like a slab of ivory. The Nightingale Charity Gala, it announced in sweeping gold calligraphy, to be held in the celestial ballroom of the new Ethelgard Grand Hotel. For most, it was the social event of the season. For Camila Varner, it was a battlefield. 5 years. It had been 5 years since the divorce, a chasm of time that felt both like a lifetime and a raw, recent wound. She could still hear Carlos Mitchell's final words, not shouted in anger, but delivered with the calm, cutting precision of a surgeon. "Look at this place, Ellie," he had said, gesturing around their small, lovingly decorated 2-bedroom apartment. They had painted the walls themselves, a soft sage green. She had refinished the hardwood floors by hand. "It's nice. It's comfortable. And that's all you'll ever want. Comfort." "What's wrong with comfort, Carlos?" she had asked, her voice trembling. "Nothing," he sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "If you're a hobbit, I want more. I want a life that roars, not one that hums. You're humming, Ellie. I need to be with someone who roars." He had called her his cozy anchor, a compliment that was actually a condemnation. He said her lack of ambition was dragging him down, that her contentment was a cage he had to escape. He was a junior associate at a finance firm then, with eyes full of skyscrapers and a heart full of disdain for their simple life. He left her for a world of glittering surfaces, leaving her with the sage green walls that suddenly felt like they were closing in. The first year was a blur of grief and cheap wine. She was the discarded wife, the failed project. His words became her inner monologue, unambitious, small content. She hated that last word most of all. Her contentment had been love, a deep, quiet joy in building a life with him. He had twisted it into a character flaw. But then something shifted. One lonely Saturday, staring at the walls he'd mocked, she felt a flicker of defiance. She didn't just want to repaint them, she wanted to knock them down. Metaphorically at first, she quit her stable but unfulfilling job as an administrative assistant and cashed in the small savings she'd been awarded in the divorce. She enrolled in an intensive interior architecture and design program. It was brutal. She was older than most of her classmates, running on caffeine and pure spite. While they partied, she studied blueprints. While they networked, she learned about load-bearing walls and the tensile strength of steel. The ghost of Carlos's ambition haunted her, but now it propelled her. She wasn't just humming anymore. She was learning to conduct an orchestra of light, space, and form. She started small after graduating, a dental office redesign, a modern refresh for a local law firm. She poured all the love and detail she had once put into her home into her projects. She founded Varna Visionaries, a boutique design firm. Her style was unique. She didn't just decorate spaces, she curated experiences. She blended classic textures with bold modern lines, creating environments that felt both timeless and breathtakingly new. Her motto was "Locus ista sentit," this place feels. Her big break came from an unexpected source. A new ultra-luxury hotel chain, Croft Holdings, was expanding into the city. They were building the Ethelgard Grand, a monument of glass and steel. Their CEO, was a man named Zachary Croft, an enigmatic figure known for his demanding standards and impeccable taste. Every major design firm in the country was vying for the contract to design the hotel's signature suites and public spaces. Camila, with her tiny two-person firm, knew she was a long shot. But she spent a month doing nothing but preparing her pitch. She didn't just present mood boards, she presented a philosophy. She spoke of how the lobby should feel like a deep breath, how the bar should encourage clandestine whispers, and how the guest rooms should be sanctuaries from the city's relentless energy. She didn't talk about furniture, she talked about feelings. She got the job. The project had consumed her for 2 years. It was the most challenging, exhilarating, and exhausting work of her life. She worked directly with Zachary Croft, a man who was the polar opposite of Carlos. Where Carlos was loud, Zachary was quiet. Where Carlos demanded attention, Zachary commanded respect through his quiet intelligence and piercing insight. He was demanding, yes, but he saw her vision, and instead of trying to change it, gave her the resources to fully realize it. There was a mutual professional respect that felt more validating than any praise she had ever received. Now, the Ethelgard Grand was complete. The Nightingale Gala was its grand unveiling, and Camila had to be there. It was the culmination of her life's work, a testament to the woman she had become. It was also, she knew, with a knot in her stomach, exactly the kind of event Carlos would attend. He had climbed the ladder just as he'd planned. He was now a vice president at the same firm, a regular in the city's society pages. He had his roaring life. Her best friend and lead drafter Chloe was zipping up the back of her dress. It was a deep emerald silk that shimmered under the light, elegant and understated. It wasn't flashy, it was just her. "You look like you own the place," Chloe said, adjusting a strap on Camila's shoulder. Camila gave a weak smile in the mirror. "I just designed some of the rooms. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." "Details, details. You're nervous about seeing him, aren't you?" Camila didn't have to ask who he was. "I'm not nervous. I'm prepared. He's a part of my past. Tonight is about my future." But as she clipped on a pair of diamond and emerald earrings, a gift to herself purchased with the first major installment of the Ethelgard payment, she couldn't quiet the whisper of insecurity. Would he look at her and see the woman who had built this new life? Or would he only see the cozy anchor he'd so carelessly cast off? She took a deep breath, the scent of her perfume, a sophisticated blend of sandalwood and jasmine, filling the air. It was time to find out. The Celestial Ballroom was designed to steal your breath, and it succeeded. Camila had agonized over every detail, and seeing it come to life was a dizzying thrill. The ceiling was a vast midnight blue dome embedded with thousands of fiber optic lights that twinkled like a clear winter sky. Towering arched windows overlooked the glittering cityscape. Crystal chandeliers shaped like weeping willows dripped light onto the sea of guests dressed in their finest. The air hummed with the clinking of glasses, the low thrum of a string quartet, and the murmur of 100 conversations about money, power, and art. For a moment, Camilla felt a surge of pure, unadulterated pride. I did this. She had helped create this pocket of magic in the middle of the city. She saw Zachary Croft across the room, a pillar of calm in the swirling social eddy, speaking with the mayor. He caught her eye and gave a subtle, appreciative nod. It was enough. It grounded her. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began to navigate the room. She was here to work in a sense, to network, to finally put a face to Varna visionaries for the city's elite. Several people, mostly architects and patrons of the arts, who had followed the Ethelgard's construction, approached her. They complimented the space, the daring use of textured velvet against raw marble, the intimate lighting. With each conversation, her confidence grew. She wasn't an ex-wife tonight. She was an artist, a professional in her element. The ghost of Carlos Mitchell began to feel distant, a faded photograph from another life. And then she saw him. He was holding court near the grand fireplace, a masterpiece of carved black marble she'd designed to be the room's anchor. Carlos hadn't just climbed the ladder, he'd vaulted up it. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than their first car. He looked handsome, polished, and utterly self-satisfied, and on his arm was the roar he'd always wanted. The woman was Isabella Rossi. Camilla knew the name, of course. The Rossis were old money, a family whose name was carved onto university buildings and museum wings. Isabella was a society darling, a philanthropist, and famously beautiful. She was wearing a strapless gown of shimmering silver, and a necklace of sapphires and diamonds glittered at her throat. She looked at Carlos with an expression of pure adoration. They were the perfect couple, a portrait of success. Camilla's heart did a painful little stutter step. She told herself it didn't matter. She had her own success, a success built of grit and talent, not connections. She turned to walk toward the terrace, needing a moment of fresh air, deciding to avoid him entirely. It was the mature, sensible thing to do, but it was too late. His eyes, sharp and predatory, scanned the crowd and locked onto her. A slow, smug smile spread across his face. He excused himself from his circle and, with Isabella in tow, began walking directly toward her. There was no escape. Camilla froze, her champagne flute feeling suddenly heavy in her hand. Her carefully constructed confidence began to crumble. She straightened her spine, a silent command to herself. Do not let him see you flinch. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Carlos said, his voice a smooth, condescending drawl. It was the same tone he used when he found a coupon she'd clipped, or when she'd suggested a vacation to a national park instead of St. Bart's. Camilla said, her voice impressively steady. It's a beautiful venue, isn't it? It's certainly something, he said, his eyes flicking around with a dismissive air as if he hadn't even noticed the design. His gaze landed back on her. He raked his eyes over her emerald dress, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, before he settled on a look of amused pity. I almost didn't recognize you without an apron on. The jab was so childish, so petty it almost made her laugh. But the intent was venomous. He wanted to remind her of the domestic life he'd scorned. He then turned to his fiancée, his arm tightening around her waist. Isabella, darling, I want you to meet someone from my past. This is Camila, my ex-wife. He said the word ex-wife as if it were a slightly embarrassing job title, like assistant manager of a failing bookstore. Isabella, to her credit, looked slightly uncomfortable. She offered a polite, if hesitant, smile. It's a pleasure to meet you, Camilla. Her voice was soft-cultured. Camilla nodded. You as well, Isabella. And then it happened. Carlos looked from Isabella, glittering and perfect, back to Camilla, standing alone. And he laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a full, throaty laugh, rich with triumph. It was the laugh of a man who believed he had traded a dusty station wagon for a brand new Ferrari and had just seen the station wagon parked outside the dealership. It was a laugh that said, "Can you believe I was ever with that? Look at me now. Look what I have. And look at you. Still just you." He leaned in, a conspiratorial whisper, meant for both women to hear. Camilla used to be in charge of my domestic portfolio, he said, winking at Isabella. She was very organized. He was reducing her entire being, their entire history, into a dismissive, patronizing joke for the benefit of his new, upgraded partner. The sound of his laughter echoed in the vast, beautiful room she had created. It ricocheted off the marble and crystal, each echo a fresh stab of humiliation. Every insecurity he had ever planted in her mind bloomed at once. Small, content, unambitious, a cozy anchor. In that moment, surrounded by the greatest achievement of her professional life, she had never felt smaller. Her room suddenly felt alien and hostile. Her face burned, and she could feel the sting of tears threatening behind her eyes. She gripped her champagne flute so tightly, she was surprised it didn't shatter. She was a ghost at the feast of his success, and he was laughing at her. Humiliation is a uniquely cold fire. It burns away your composure, leaving you exposed and shivering. Camilla felt the eyes of the people nearby, the ones who had heard Carlos's booming laugh and saw the pity and awkward curiosity on their faces. She had to get away. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice a tight, thin wire. She didn't wait for a response. She turned on her heel and walked, not ran toward the doors leading to the Juliet balcony, a small, private space she'd designed for precisely this reason, for a moment of quiet escape. The cool night air was a relief against her hot cheeks. Below the city was a tapestry of light, indifferent and beautiful. She rested her hands on the cold stone balustrade, took a shaky breath, and willed the tears not to fall. Crying was a victory for him. He had wanted a reaction, and she had barely managed to withhold it. She hated him for it. She hated him for being able to walk back into her life for 30 seconds and dismantle the confidence she had spent 5 years building. The emerald dress felt like a costume. The ballroom, her triumph, felt like his stage. He had defined her once again, and the definition was less than. "The view from here is my favorite." The voice was calm and low, startling her. She turned to see Zachary Croft standing in the doorway, a glass of what looked like scotch in his hand. He wasn't looking at her with pity, but at the skyline. "You have to be far enough away to appreciate the scale of it all." He continued walking to stand beside her at the balustrade. "Too close, and all you see is traffic and noise." Camilla swallowed, trying to find her professional voice. "Mr. Croft, I was just getting some air." "Zachary, please," he said, finally turning to look at her. His eyes were a startlingly clear shade of grey, and they were perceptive. He missed nothing. "Are you all right, Camilla? You left in something of a hurry?" "I'm fine. Just a bit overwhelmed by the turnout." She lied the words, feeling clumsy and false. He took a slow sip of his scotch, his gaze never leaving her face. "I saw you talking with Carlos Mitchell." The name hung in the air between them. Of course, Zachary knew who Carlos was. In their world of high finance and corporate maneuvering, everyone knew everyone. Camilla just nodded, looking back out at the city. She couldn't bring herself to explain the humiliation, to give voice to how small Carlos had made her feel. "He was my ex-husband," she said quietly, the admission feeling like a confession of failure. Zachary was silent for a moment. She braced herself for the inevitable platitude, the "I'm sorry to hear that," or the awkward change of subject. Instead, he said, "His loss, then." It was so simple, so direct, that it caught her off guard. She looked at him, and for the first time she saw something beyond the powerful CEO. She saw a kindness in his eyes, a genuine empathy that was entirely at odds with the cutthroat world he dominated. "He has a way of," she trailed off, unable to find the right words, "diminishing people." Zachary supplied his voice, laced with a subtle distaste, to make himself appear brighter. "It's the oldest trick in the book for men with new money and old insecurities. I've seen him do it in boardrooms. I can only imagine how it feels when it's personal." The understanding was so complete, so instantaneous, that the tightness in Camilla's chest eased. He saw it. He saw Carlos for exactly what he was, an insecure man playing a part. He didn't see her as the pathetic ex-wife. He saw her as the target of a petty bully. "I suppose I just wasn't expecting it," she admitted, her voice stronger now. "To feel so broadsided in a room I helped create." "This isn't just a room you helped create, Camila," Zachary said, his tone shifting from gentle to firm. He gestured back toward the ballroom. "This is your vision. I am merely the man who was smart enough to fund it. The soul of this place, the light, the feel, the very air people are breathing, that's all you. You are not a guest in this hotel. In many ways, you are its heart." His words were a balm on her wounded pride. He was reframing the narrative, not with pity, but with respect. He was handing her back her power. He finished his scotch and set the empty glass down on the balustrade. Carlos Mitchell enjoys an audience. He thrives on the perception of status. It occurs to me that his current audience has an incomplete picture of the situation. A slow, dangerous spark lit in his grey eyes. He introduced you. I take it Camilla gave a bitter little laugh. As his ex-wife, the former head of his domestic portfolio, Zachary's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I see. Well, that's an introduction that requires a correction. He straightened his tie and offered her his arm. His smile was gone, replaced by a look of cool, unassailable authority. Allow me to reintroduce you, Camilla, the right way. Walking back into the ballroom on Zachary Croft's arm was a completely different experience. Before she had been navigating the room. Now, the room was navigating around them. Conversations paused. Heads turned. A path seemed to clear organically, the crowd parting like the Red Sea for Moses. Zachary didn't stride. He moved with an unhurried gravitational pull that drew all eyes. Camilla, her hand resting lightly on the fine wool of his tuxedo sleeve, felt her own posture change. Her back was straighter, her head held higher. The shame that had clung to her on the balcony evaporated, replaced by a bewildering sense of calm and anticipation. Carlos was exactly where they had left him, basking in the glow of the fireplace and the attention of a small but influential group. Camila recognized a city councilman, a prominent art critic, and the editor of a glossy lifestyle magazine. Carlos was in the middle of a story, gesturing grandly with a champagne flute, his laughter echoing again, though this time it sounded hollow to Camilla's ears. Isabella stood beside him, smiling, but her eyes kept darting around the room as if sensing a shift in the social atmosphere. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Camilla returning, and they widened even more when she registered who was with her. Carlos's story faltered mid-sentence as he followed Isabella's gaze. His smile froze on his face. He saw Camilla, and then he saw the man she was with. A flicker of confusion crossed his features, then annoyance as if he couldn't comprehend why the CEO of Croft Holdings was escorting his quaint ex-wife around the party. Zachary didn't stop until they were standing directly in front of the group. The remaining chatter died down completely. The silence was absolute, punctuated only by the distant strains of the string quartet. Councilman Zachary began nodding to the politician. Ms. Albright, he acknowledged the editor. He was calm, courteous, his tone betraying nothing but pleasantness. He then looked directly at Carlos, a cool, neutral expression on his face. Mitchell, I hope you're enjoying the evening. Zachary Carlos managed recovering quickly, puffing out his chest. He clearly assumed Zachary was there to speak with him. Fantastic event. Truly spectacular. I was just telling Isabella the scale is just... Zachary cut him off, not rudely, but with an air of purpose that made Carlos's words simply evaporate. He turned his body slightly, a subtle shift that made Camilla the focal point of the conversation. I wanted to make a proper introduction, Zachary said, his voice carrying easily in the sudden quiet. Some of you may have met Ms. Varner, but I fear you may have been given an incomplete biography. Carlos's face tightened. He knew instinctively that this was not going his way. Zachary's gaze swept over the group, warm and inclusive, before landing on Camilla with profound respect. This is Camilla Varner, founder and lead designer of Varner Visionaries. He paused, letting the name sink in. When we began the Ethelgard project, we looked at proposals from the top 20 firms in the nation. Big names, huge teams. But one proposal stood out. It spoke not of luxury, but of feeling. Not of expense, but of experience. It was visionary. He looked around the magnificent room, a slow, deliberate gesture. Everything you see, from the specific hue of the dome above you, to the way the light catches the weave in the curtains, to the very layout that encourages both grand gatherings and intimate conversations, that was all born from the mind of this woman, right here. A collective soft gasp went through the small group. The art critic's eyebrows shot up. The magazine editor leaned forward, her eyes alight with interest. She is the architectural soul of this hotel. Zachary stated, his voice quiet but resonant with absolute authority. She is without exaggeration one of the most formidable new talents in her field. We were lucky to get her. He then smiled a genuine warm smile directed only at Camilla. The Ethelgard Grand would be just another building without her. She gave it a heart. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a silence filled with recalibration, with a sudden dawning understanding. Camilla was not an ex-wife. She was not a ghost. She was the creator. Then, the magazine editor, a notoriously sharp woman named Genevieve Albright, turned a predatory smile on Carlos. Mitchell, didn't you say she was your ex? She asked, her tone dripping with insinuation. Carlos's face had gone from smug to confused to a pale, sickly white. The color drained from his cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Camilla, truly looked at her as if for the first time, and in his eyes was a maelstrom of shock, disbelief, and a horrifying, dawning regret. But the final crushing blow had yet to fall. The city councilman, a practical man who understood power dynamics better than anyone, looked at Zachary. It's a magnificent property, Zachary. My compliments to your entire team. Your acquisition of the old downtown portfolio was a stroke of genius. Zachary gave a modest shrug. We feel the city has a bright future. Isabella Rossi, who had been watching this all unfold with a look of growing horror, finally spoke, her voice thin. I'm sorry, I'm confused. I thought the hotel was owned by the Argent Group. Zachary turned his calm grey eyes to her, and in that moment he delivered the coup de grace, so quietly, so casually, it was more devastating than any shout. Argent is one of our subsidiaries, he explained patiently. Croft Holdings is the parent company. I own it. All of it. He gave a small, almost imperceptible gesture that encompassed the entire breathtaking ballroom. Every brick, every chandelier, every champagne flute. The implication was immediate, brutal, and absolute. Carlos Mitchell had stood in a room owned by Zachary Croft next to the woman, lauded by Zachary Croft, and had laughed at her. He had tried to humiliate the single most important person in the building, next to the owner himself. He hadn't just committed a social faux pas. He had demonstrated a catastrophic lack of judgment in front of the very people he was so desperate to impress. The laugh, that cruel, triumphant sound, it now hung in the air as the single most foolish, self-sabotaging act of the evening. The roaring life Carlos had built for himself had just been silenced by a quiet man and the woman he had thrown away. The silence that followed Zachary's quiet declaration was unlike any Camilla had ever heard. It wasn't empty. It was dense, filled with the frantic whirring of minds recalculating status and power. The air itself seemed to crackle. Carlos stood as if flash-frozen, his face a ghastly mosaic of shock and dawning horror. The smugness had not just vanished. It had been violently ripped away, leaving behind the raw, terrified insecurity of a man who has just realized he bet everything on the wrong horse and lost. The first to move was Genevieve Albright, the editor of Lux Living. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, darted from Zachary's impassive face to Camilla's composed one, then to Carlos's crumbling facade. A flicker of pure, predatory delight crossed her features. She was a connoisseur of social drama, and this was a vintage year. With a grace that was almost theatrical, she turned her back on Carlos, a gesture as decisive and brutal as a guillotine's blade, and beamed at Camilla. Miss Varner, she gushed, her voice a warm, honeyed contralto that commanded attention. A true pleasure. Your work is simply astonishing. I'm Genevieve Albright, editor-in-chief at Lux Living. I must confess we're doing a feature on the new vanguards of design for our winter issue, and I believe we may have just found our perfect cover story. She extended the hand, not for a handshake, but to present a crisp, impossibly elegant business card. Camilla, moving with a steadiness that felt foreign, to her own racing heart, accepted it. Thank you, Miss Albright. I'd be honored. The honor is all mine, Genevieve insisted. My assistant will call you Monday. We must capture this lightning in a bottle. With that, the spell was broken. The art critic, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, eagerly, cutting off any chance Carlos might have had to speak. Your use of chiaroscuro with the ambient lighting is masterful, Ms. Varner. A true nod to the Baroque masters, but with a distinctly modern sensibility. What were your primary influences? Suddenly, Camilla was no longer on the defensive. She was the focal point. The city councilman, the other investors, the curious onlookers, they formed a new circle. This one centered on her. They gravitated toward her, not with pity, but with a palpable electric respect. They saw her not as an appendage to a powerful man, but as a source of power herself. From within this new protective orbit, she could see the wreckage she'd left behind. Isabella, her face a mask of cold fury, was whispering venomously into Carlos's ear. Camilla couldn't hear the words, but she could see their effect. Carlos flinched, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Isabella gave him one last look of pure contempt, a look that stripped him of any remaining dignity, then turned and strode away without a backward glance. Her shimmering silver dress was like a beacon of his failure as she disappeared into the unpitying crowd, leaving him utterly devastatingly alone by the grand fireplace he no longer commanded. He was a king deposed in his own throne room, which had just been revealed to belong to another. Zachary leaned in his voice, a low murmur, meant only for her. I believe a change of scenery is in order. Would you care for a less eventful drink? Camilla gave him a grateful, shaky smile. I think I'd like that very much. He placed a hand lightly on the small of her back and guided her not toward the main bar, but through a discreet, unmarked door she knew intimately. She had designed this escape route herself. It led to the Croft Lounge, a private sanctuary reserved for Zachary and his personal guests. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, the noise of the gala vanished, replaced by a welcoming, peaceful hush. The lounge was her personal favorite space in the entire hotel. It was paneled in dark, rich walnut, with deep leather armchairs you could sink into. A single magnificent abstract painting, a swirl of deep blues, emeralds, and golds, was the only art on the walls. The lighting was low and warm, emanating from hidden sources that made the room glow. It was a space designed for quiet contemplation and sincere conversation. Zachary moved to the small, impeccably stocked bar. The sound of him pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid was the only sound. He handed her a glass of what she recognized as a very fine, single malt scotch. To Resonance, he said, his voice soft. Camilla looked at him, puzzled. Resonance? Yes, he said, settling into the armchair opposite her. Carlos Mitchell wanted a life that roared. It's a common desire for men like him. They believe success is measured in volume. They need the loud car, the loud parties, the loud declarations of their own importance. But it's all just noise. It fades quickly and leaves nothing behind. He swirled the scotch in his glass, his grey eyes thoughtful and kind. You, on the other hand, you don't roar. You resonate. Your work, this room, it has a frequency. It's quiet, but it sinks in. It affects people on a deeper level. It has substance. It lasts. He looked directly at her, his gaze holding hers. He mistook your contentment for a lack of ambition because he doesn't understand the difference between noise and power. His is a life of roaring. Yours is a life of resonance. And resonance is infinitely more powerful. His words were like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. He had taken the very core of Carlos's criticism and transformed it into a profound compliment. He hadn't just defended her, he had understood her on a fundamental level that no one, not even she herself, had ever articulated so clearly. The last vestiges of her old insecurities crumbled to dust. He never thought I'd amount to anything. She confessed the admission, now feeling less like a wound, and more like a historical fact. He saw my love for creating a home, a quiet life, as a flaw holding him back. It wasn't a flaw, Zachary stated simply. It was your talent in its infancy. You were practicing on a small scale. Now you're creating homes for hundreds of people a night. You're creating sanctuaries for the entire city. He just didn't have the vision to see it. Their conversation flowed easily after that, drifting away from Carlos and into safer, more interesting waters. They spoke of art and books, of travel, of the strange isolation that often comes with pouring your entire soul into your work. She discovered his quiet demeanor hid a surprisingly dry wit. He learned about her childhood in a small town, a detail she would have been ashamed to admit to Carlos, but which Zachary found fascinating. It was no longer a CEO and his designer. It was a man and a woman discovering a rare and wonderful harmony. Eventually, the quiet comfort of the lounge had to end. As they walked back toward the ballroom, the sound of the orchestra swelling to greet them, they saw him. Carlos was hovering near the entrance, looking haggard. His perfect tuxedo was now rumpled, his hair slightly askew. He looked like a man who had been shipwrecked. As they approached, he took a hesitant step forward, his eyes pleading. "Camilla," he started, his voice thin and raspy. Can I talk to you for a second? Please, I had no idea." Camila stopped and looked at him. She looked at the man who had shaped her, broke her, and inadvertently launched her. And she felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even the faintest glimmer of triumphant satisfaction. It was like looking at a stranger you vaguely recognized from an old photograph. The emotional charge was gone. He had no more power over her. "I don't think we have anything left to talk about, Carlos," she said, her voice perfectly calm and clear. It was not a statement of anger, but of fact. Their story had concluded. The book was closed. She didn't wait for him to respond. She simply turned and walked past him, Zachary falling into step beside her. As they re-entered the heart of the ballroom, the orchestra began to play a slow, elegant waltz. The magnificent space spun around her, a galaxy of her own creation. Zachary turned to her, a genuine smile gracing his lips for the first time that evening. "May I have this dance, Miss Varner?" he asked, the formal title, now feeling like a playful, intimate secret between them. "You may, Mr. Croft," she replied, her own smile feeling bright and completely unburdened. He led her onto the marble dance floor. As he took her in his arms, she felt a profound sense of peace settle deep in her bones. The victory wasn't in Carlos's public ruin. The victory wasn't in the business cards now tucked in her clutch. The victory was this moment, the quiet strength in her own heart, the warmth of a good man's hand in hers, and the unshakable knowledge that her worth was not a reflection in someone else's eyes, but the solid, resonant foundation of the life she had built herself. The morning after the Nightingale Gala silence reigned in the small chic office of Varna Visionaries. It was the heavy, expectant silence of a world holding its breath. Camila sat at her desk, a mug of black coffee steaming untouched in her hands, staring at the phone as if it were an unexploded bomb. Chloe, her ever-loyal friend and now de facto COO, was doing the same with her own monitor, her eyes wide. "It's been an hour," Chloe whispered, as if a loud noise might shatter the spell. "The phone hasn't rung. The email server hasn't pinged. Maybe we imagined it all. Maybe we had a collective champagne-fueled hallucination." As if on cue, the phone on Camilla's desk let out a shrill, jarring ring. Both women jumped. Camila hesitated for a second, then picked it up, her voice a little shaky. "Varna Visionaries, Camilla speaking." The voice on the other end was breathless, belonging to the assistant of a famous hotelier from New York. He wanted to discuss a new project in Soho. While she was still processing that, her cell phone sitting on the desk began to vibrate. A text from an unknown number. It was the art critic from the party asking for a follow-up coffee. Then Chloe let out a low whistle. "Ellie," she said, her voice awestruck as she stared at her email inbox. "You need to see this." Camilla put the assistant on a brief hold and walked over. The inbox, which usually received a dozen emails a day, was flooded. The subject lines were a dizzying litany of praise and opportunity. Inquiry from the Chicago Arts Institute, collaboration proposal. West Coast Realty Group interview request. Forbes magazine, and most prominently, an email with the subject line cover story follow-up from Genevieve Albright at Lux Living. The dam had broken. The silence was replaced by a deluge. The next few weeks were a blur of fielding calls, drafting preliminary proposals, and navigating a level of attention Camilla had never imagined. Genevieve Albright's feature was the centerpiece of it all. The photo shoot didn't take place in a sterile studio, but in the Ethelgard itself. Genevieve insisted on it. She wanted Camilla in her natural element. The photographer had her stand on the Juliet balcony, where she'd sought refuge, the city lights twinkling behind her, like a conquered kingdom. He had her run a hand over the cool black marble of the fireplace, where Carlos had tried to humiliate her. It felt like reclaiming territory, planting her flag on the geography of her own past. During the interview, Genevieve, a woman with a reputation for merciless questions, was surprisingly gentle. "Forget the building for a moment, Ms. Varner," she said, her pen poised. "Tell me about the feeling you had when you first decided to start your own firm. What was the spark?" Camilla didn't speak of Carlos. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke of the desire to create spaces that felt like a sanctuary of her belief that a room could be a form of therapy. She spoke of resilience. The article that resulted was a masterpiece of narrative journalism. It portrayed her not as a victim who got lucky, but as a quiet force of nature. It concluded with a line that Camilla would never forget. In a world full of loud voices, striving to be heard, Camilla Varner has reminded us that the most powerful statements are often made in the thoughtful arrangement of light, space, and silence. She doesn't build buildings, she builds feelings. And the feeling she has built for herself is undeniably one of triumph. The article, of course, made no mention of Carlos Mitchell. His name was simply absent, an omission so complete it felt like a surgical removal. He was an irrelevant footnote edited out of the story of her and news of his own story reached her in trickles. A former colleague mentioned his engagement to Isabella Rossi had been abruptly called off. The Rossi family, whose power was as old and solid as bedrock, had no use for a man who had demonstrated such a catastrophic lack of judgment. Then, Chloe saw a small item in a trade publication. Carlos Mitchell had been reassigned to lead new market expansion, a corporate euphemism for a transfer to a less prestigious office in a city far from the roaring center of finance he so craved. Camilla felt a brief phantom pang upon hearing the news, not of satisfaction, but of a distant, melancholy pity for the ambitious young man she had once loved, who had gotten so lost in his hunger for a certain kind of life that he'd forgotten how to be a good person. Then the feeling was gone, replaced by the pressing reality of her own burgeoning future. His fate was an echo from a room she no longer occupied. Her life was now defined by her work and by the quiet, steady presence of Zachary Croft. Their relationship unfolded away from the glittering galas and society pages. It was built in the small moments. One Saturday, he took her to a sprawling architectural salvage yard outside the city, a chaotic wonderland of old doors, stained glass windows, and forgotten mantels. As she ran her hand over a heavy oak newel post, its carvings worn smooth by a century of hands, he watched her, a soft smile on his face. "What do you see?" he asked. "A story," she answered without hesitation. "I see a family's home, the sound of children running up and down the stairs. I see potential. It just needs the right place to belong again." "That's what I love about you," he said, his voice low and serious. "You don't see what's broken. You see what it could become." Another evening, he came to her apartment for dinner, the apartment Carlos had called a cozy anchor. As she cooked, Zachary walked through the space, taking in the soft sage walls. She'd never repainted the books, stacked on every available surface, the comfortable, slightly worn armchair in the corner. He stood for a long time by the window, looking out at the familiar, quiet street. "This place feels like you," he said, turning to her. "It's calm. It's thoughtful. It's a sanctuary." He had taken the very words Carlos had used as insults and turned them into the highest compliments. In that moment, a wound Camilla hadn't even realized was still there, finally completely healed. Their connection wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was the slow, deliberate construction of something meant to last. It was a foundation of mutual respect, reinforced with shared laughter and quiet understanding. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after the gala, they were walking a path along the river, the air smelling of wood smoke and damp earth. The trees were a riot of colour, their fiery leaves carpeting the ground. Camila felt a sense of profound peace, a feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. "I have a proposal for you," Zachary said, his tone shifting from casual to serious, though his eyes remained warm. Camilla's heart gave a little flutter. She smiled, teasing him. "Oh, does Croft Holdings have another building that needs a heart?" "No," he said, stopping on the path. He turned to face her fully, the golden afternoon light catching in his hair. He took both of her hands in his, their warmth a comforting anchor. "It's a much smaller project, a joint venture." He paused, his grey eyes searching hers. "I own a house upstate, on a lake. It's an old stone farmhouse, been in my family for generations, but empty for years. It's a bit neglected, frankly, but it has good bones, the kind you like. It needs new light, new life. It needs someone to see its potential. It needs a permanent vision." He squeezed her hands gently. "I was thinking," he said, his voice soft but clear, "that it needs the full-time attention of Varner and Croft, as partners, in every sense of the word." The world seemed to fall away. All she could hear was the rustle of the leaves and the steady beating of her own heart. This wasn't a grand declaration in a crowded ballroom. This was real. It was a proposal to build not just a building, but a life, to take something old and neglected and give it a future. It was their story told in the language of architecture. Tears welled in Camilla's eyes, but they were not the hot, stinging tears of humiliation she had fought back on a balcony a lifetime ago. They were tears of pure radiant joy, a joy she had designed, drafted and built from the foundations up. She thought of the woman. She was the one who hummed, instead of roared, the cozy anchor. She had learned that a quiet life didn't mean a small one. Her roar wasn't in her voice. It was in her work, in her resilience, in the empire she had quietly built while no one was watching. Her contentment wasn't a weakness. It was the bedrock upon which she had constructed her own happiness. "I think," Camilla Varnier said, her smile as bright and brilliant as the autumn sun filtering through the trees, "that I would love to take on that project." Camilla's story isn't just about revenge. It's about rewriting your own narrative. It's a powerful reminder that the most profound victory isn't seeing someone who hurt you fall. It's rising so high that you can no longer even see them. Her triumph wasn't the moment her ex was humiliated, but the moment she realized his opinion no longer mattered. She didn't need a prince to save her. She became the queen of her own kingdom, built with her own two hands. Her story proves that true power isn't loud or flashy. It's the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. If you've ever felt underestimated or defined by someone else's small-minded view of you, let this story be your fuel.
What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone." He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. "The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. "Where am I supposed to go, Julian?" She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. "I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent." He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. "I will." Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. "You know I almost feel sorry for you," he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. "You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, what, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned, in his voice a venomous whisper, in her ear. "Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone." He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. "No one will ever want you. You will die alone." She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty. And in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. "No one will ever want you." It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now. Emma gave a weak smile. I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing. Nonsense, Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are. Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. See, she's still in there, Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. Now for the main event. She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. What's this? Emma asked. This, Chloe said with a flourish, is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there. Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron. First, Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge. I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible. Too bad, Chloe countered. Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him. Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. You will die alone. Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Okay, I'll go. Chloe's smile was triumphant. That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. Stop hiding behind the ficus, Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. You look like a goddess. Own it. They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. "I need some air," she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas?" The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. "Yes," Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, "It's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture." The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "Most people just see the ballerina," he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. "You see the work." A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field." Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice? Is she corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting? "It is my field." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Good." An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. "Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne." Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. "You know him," he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. "He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. "It's fine. I should go back inside." "Wait," he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. "My name is Alistair." He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. "Emma," she replied. "Emma," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work." He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. "For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina." Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling, the reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. "Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list." Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now. With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story. The photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend, the handhold seen round the world? Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she? Gold digger alert. Poor Julian. He's so classy. She's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster. Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. Don't read that garbage, she ordered. I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient, weaponized press release. Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. Oh, honey. She enveloped Emma in a hug. Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe, Emma croaked. Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing. Of course he did. Chloe said, her voice steely. This is his playbook. Control the narrative. Isolate the target. Publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator. Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. Don't answer it, she whispered. It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support, Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. Who is it? A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. It's Alistair Sterling. For Emma Vance. Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. Let him in, Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in. In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. Miss Vance. Emma, he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. I know this is an intrusion. May I come in? She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. I came to apologize, he said, turning back to her. My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that. It's not your fault, Emma said, finding her voice. It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours, Alistair countered, and I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here. He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. This is for you. She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone, he explained. Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe. Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. I also saw his statement. Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen. Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming. Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms. He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence. A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. He built his entire empire on my work. The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. What do you mean, his book? Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity, legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide. Chloe looked horrified. Emma, you never told me it was that direct. I was ashamed, Emma admitted. And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project. Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. Do you have proof? He asked quietly. Drafts, notes, emails. Emma's heart leaped. Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything. Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. Then, we have a new plan, he said. We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about. He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that trace the intellectual genesis of the architect of you directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. "He didn't just steal my words," she said to Alastair, her voice shaking with emotion. "He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity." Alastair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. "He won't get away with it," Alastair said, his voice low and resolute. "Now, we need to choose our moment." The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. "It's perfect," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down," Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I can't just walk in and accuse him." "You won't have to," Alastair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alastair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. "Recently," he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy." Emma felt Alastair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. "Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process." Julian preened. It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul. Interesting, Sarah said, looking down at her notes. Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, "To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality." A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, "The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality." A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on? The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name? Sarah countered, her voice sharp. Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. "I am not a victim or a gold digger," the statement read. "I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of the architect of you were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out." The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the architect of you was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered a small, wondering smile touching her lips. The storm. I think it's finally over. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. No, he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn. The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorn Fraud, The Great Pretender, and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne. It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the colour back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. "He thought it was an ending," she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. "But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work." Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise. And it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential.